Hello, everyone, and welcome to Right Wing Rising and another installment of my 240 to Win series. Please be sure to like this video down below before you are finished watching and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So, the state that we have to talk about today is the state of South Carolina. Several elections in that state were competitive, were focused on by the national media in the 2020 election. And it will be interesting to see how that carries over for certain races this fall, 4 years later. Donald Trump got 55% of the vote, give or take, in the state both times. He won by 12 points against Joe Biden in 2020, but this was a decrease from his margin of victory in 2016, which was a 14-point win. Trump increased his vote total by 200,000 votes from 2016, but so did Joe Biden from Hillary Clinton's vote total in 2016. So both candidates gained the same number of new voters that came to the polls to support them in the state compared to the previous election. So Trump's decreased margin of victory did not come from attracting any less new voters to his side than Joe Biden did. A lot of it was due to a decreased third-party vote share in the state by almost 3%, that mainly the overwhelming majority went to the Democratic vote share, since many third-party candidates these days are disaffected anti-Trump Republicans or progressives, both of which leaned towards Joe Biden in 2020. And Joe Biden also had a unique strength in South Carolina, the state that won him the nomination in 2020, after he had lost Iowa and New Hampshire, embarrassingly, to start off the Democratic primary that year. But overwhelmingly winning the state in the primary gave him the momentum to move forward and go on to win the nomination. And this was in part thanks to his strong support from the black population in the state, which was helped by his longtime friendship and partnership with Jim Clyburn, the lone Democratic congressman from the state who has been a strong ally of his over the years. And he really rallied up Democratic voters in the state to turn out for Joe Biden. And we saw that nationwide Biden did well with black voters in 2020. So it will be interesting to see if Harris will do better or worse than Joe Biden in the state and with that population, because there have been many polls showing that Trump is making some inroads with that community, as African American men have been trending towards Trump. Not a majority of them, but definitely a sizable percentage more than what Trump got from that voting bloc in 2020. But many polls have shown Harris energizing women behind her, especially black women. And it will be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out in the state, because Democrats have a high floor in the state. A quarter of the citizens in South Carolina are of African American descent, but the Democratic Party also has a low ceiling to the percentage of the vote that they can get in South Carolina, because 3/4 of the state is Christian, there is a large working class in the state, and a large majority of people there do not have college degrees. And there are also a decent amount of farming jobs in the rural areas. All of these demographics, especially in recent years, are trending heavily towards Republicans and not friendly to liberals. The DNC chair is Jamie Harrison, who is from South Carolina, so he will probably want Democrats to do well in his home state and probably will hype up how Kamala Harris is doing in the state. So don't be surprised if there are some push polls to show a close race between Harris and Trump, within 5 to 10 points. However, I think Donald Trump will actually improve in the state and get a margin of victory closer to 15 points rather than 10, because this state has shown that it likes to swing the way that the national popular vote goes. And 2020 was basically a worst-case scenario for Republicans nationwide, with a lot of backlash against Donald Trump at the time as president. So I expect the national popular vote to be much less Democrat by a couple of points, and that should send South Carolina in a more Republican direction. Jamie Harrison was also the 2020 Democratic nominee against Lindsey Graham in his Senate race there. Even though many polls showed a race that was a complete toss-up It was listed as a target state by the Democrats, and Jamie Harrison was even up in some polls, close to Election Day. Lindsey Graham still won by 10 points, a big margin for a state that was supposed to be a battleground. Even though this was a closer margin than normal, it was still a big win, especially considering that Jamie Harrison raised tens of millions of dollars in his Senate bid. He raised $57 million in one quarter, more than Beto O'Rourke, who was getting millions upon millions in 2018 against Ted Cruz in Texas. That's how much effort and money Democrats were throwing at South Carolina, and they could only get it to 10 points against a guy like Lindsey Graham, who's not that popular with either party. So I'm very skeptical that Kamala Harris could make it any closer than 10 to 12 points, and I think Trump will actually improve in this state. So this state is somewhat competitive at the presidential election level. It's not like Trump is winning it by 30 points. It's a completely safe Republican state no matter what. Trump probably wins it by half of that margin. Like I said, around 15. That's my prediction. I think he improves a little bit and makes it a more comfortable win in the state. The other interesting and slightly competitive race happening down ballot is in the 1st Congressional District, which has a recent history of being a battleground House seat. In 2018, Democrats flipped the seat during their blue wave midterm year, with Joe Cunningham winning by 1.5 points and only 4,000 votes. But Republicans immediately flipped it back in 2020, winning by a nearly identical margin and a little over 5,000 votes. After the 2020 election, once the 2020 census had been completed and redistricting was carried out in the state, this congressional district got a little bit more Republican. The incumbent, Nancy Mace, won by 14 points in 2022, and the current lines of the district have stayed intact despite Democrats' lawsuit attempts to try and change it and make it more Democratic favorable. The courts rejected those appeals. So the current map for the district used in 2022 will again be used this fall, which is good news for Mace. But that 14-point margin of victory for her in 2022 was obviously a lot bigger than the win that she had in 2020 to flip the district by the skin of her teeth, and a lot of this could be due to her being on the same ticket as the Republican governor running for re-election and winning by a landslide 17 points. So her comfortable win does not mean it will not be somewhat close this time, and that Republicans should not spend in the seat to protect it, because Trump only won this seat by 8.5 points in 2020. So Nancy Mace, as the incumbent, is obviously still favored, but she probably will only win by about 10 points, give or take, compared to the inflated number that she won by in the midterms. So this is still an important House race to keep an eye on election night. And Nancy Mace herself has come a long way. She's had an interesting political career so far. She served 2 terms in the House, and when she was first running for re-election in 2022, Trump endorsed her challenger, that being Katie Arrington, who Mace narrowly beat by 8 points. Trump endorsed against her because she had some questionable and bad votes in her first term, but she had a much improved voting record this time around. She was staunchly opposed to giving foreign aid to Ukraine and to other countries in general. She has had a good record on immigration votes, and her voting record and stance on the pro-life issue has improved. She has been vocal in her messaging and the bills that she has supported in advocating for pregnancy resource centers and monetary support for pregnant mothers. And she joined members of the House Freedom Caucus in removing Kevin McCarthy from the speakership, which was a positive thing at the time because he was really just doing backdoor deals with the Democrats and backstabbing his promises to his fellow Republican members in the House. And McCarthy came after Nancy Mace for having a hand in ousting him from his seat and endorsed a rhino challenger to her in the primary, who she easily ousted this time by a 27-point margin of victory. And Trump endorsed Nancy Mace over the McCarthy-backed Catherine Templeton, which greatly boosted her toward that primary victory and helped her double the vote total of her opponent. So Nancy Mace not only flipped the seat red for Republicans, but also went from being a pretty meh congresswoman to actually being pretty solid now. The only other seat to keep an eye on at the House level in South Carolina is the 2nd congressional district, because Trump only won this seat by 10.5, and the incumbent, Joe Wilson, did win by 20 points in the midterms, but again, this was on the same ballot as a Republican incumbent governor that won by a lot, that helped down ballot races. I expect it to be closer, probably in line with a 12 to 15 point victory this time around. So definitely a big drop off from his 2022 performance. Democrats seem more focused on the 1st congressional seat against Mace than they do in the 2nd district against Joe Wilson. But this race still might fall into the category of a likely Republican victory instead of a blowout landslide Republican victory. So that's the only other race to keep an eye on in the state. Overall, South Carolina is a state that is trending more and more conservative. The governor, who I have mentioned multiple times, winning re-election by a landslide in 2022, is Henry McMaster, and he ran a very conservative campaign, especially on social issues, both in regard to the pro-life movement and even not being afraid to shy away on the debate stage from defending traditional marriage and taking a strong stance against the LGBTQ agenda. That did not slow him down. It actually resonated and helped him with many voters in the state, even though he was running against the former congressman who Nancy Mace defeated in 2020. So it wasn't like he was running against a no-name. The other senator from the state, Tim Scott, won by 26 points on the same ballot. And the Republican Party got 65% of the popular vote for the House of Representatives and earned a supermajority in the State House by gaining 7 seats to earn a 88 to 36 advantage. And there's still room to grow this election cycle, as many Democrat seats were won by very narrow margins. And this year, 3 Republican state senators that were vocally pro-choice, pro-abortion, that blocked the heartbeat bill that Henry McMaster and the Republican state legislature were trying to pass, got primaried out and defeated. They lost renomination and were replaced by more conservative Republicans. And this should allow for a more successful passage of the heartbeat bill that will protect babies' lives when a heartbeat can be detected, usually around 6 weeks. And that's a very positive thing towards advancing a more conservative culture in the state and a more conservative future direction that the state is trending in. So overall, things are looking good in South Carolina. Look for Trump to actually improve in the state compared to 2020, even with Kamala Harris energizing Black women to turn out and support her. And I expect Nancy Mace and Joe Wilson to hold on for another term in the 1st and 2nd congressional districts, respectively, by about 10 points for Mace and closer to 15 points for Wilson. In order for Republicans to direct the future of this country, like many conservatives hope, they have to be sure to capitalize on and max out support in such states like South Carolina that have an overall conservative culture. And in recent years, they are doing just that. And they are poised to continue to do so in the elections that are taking place this upcoming November.